Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus.
Maranatha, come, Lord Jesus.
The voice of one crying in the wilderness is amongst us today. You and I, to our great joy, even though it seems that there is emptiness around us, never emptiness for a Christian, we are united with the saints, and great amongst the saints. Indeed, no greater one born of woman has there been save John the Baptist, who stands amongst us today and says, prepare the way of the Lord, a straight way for our God. And that's our call, to prepare a straight way. How? By doing what our heavenly patron, St. Paul, tells us. Rejoice, always pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances. And here we are, giving thanks. In this great mystery of the Eucharist, giving thanks in all circumstances. Yes, in these circumstances, when our church is empty, emptier. You're saying, what am I, dirt under your shoes? I'm sitting here. It's not empty. No, it's not. You are here, and with you, you bring all the members of your family in the parish, all those who are united with us, yes, at a distance through virtual connection, but all of us are here to say, thank you, Evcharisto, O Lord. And we hear the call that the way to make straight the way of the Lord for his coming at Christmas, as he will come in glory, is to open a space for him to come now. And that is the way of prayer. And so I invite you this week, as we begin a small Advent mission, to join with me as we have a 7 o'clock evening encounter on Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, and Wednesday to explore how to seek his face, to make of ours a school of prayer. Make straight the way of the Lord. Is this not, in a strange way, a blessed time? You know, Christmas has been so moved aside in terms of what it really is about. It's become a time where people talk as they make all the Hallmark Christmas movies, and we do all the nice, warm, fuzzy stuff. It's become, it's all about family, and it's about giving, and it's about buying gifts, and it's about being kind to each other. Oh, very good, but not what Christmas is about. And this year, we don't get to have family gathered around us. And we all say, rejoice always. Huh? We don't get to go shopping. Rejoice always. Yeah, give gifts to the little kids. The rest of us, we got too much. Right? Rejoice always. The world has to stop doing its colonization, its occupation of our holy day, because we can't get together in the way it was before. And now is the time for Christians to show what is the real meaning and mystery of Christmas. It is our God with us, our God, Wonder Counselor, Prince of Peace, Mighty Lord, with us in Jesus, crying out from a baby's space in the cold, alien, separated space of that grotto, that baby who comes now to open for us a way to him who will come in glory. This is the cause of our rejoicing. Well, it is the way that has been shown to us by the one who gave to us our way of celebrating Christmas. You know, for 1,200 years, as the church grew in its celebration of Christmas, it was a pretty solemn event. Christmas, in the middle of winter, was the purview of the clergy with high and solemn masses. But the way it is now, with people running around and eventually getting Christmas trees, but starting off by putting together in their homes little crib scenes that show in a real tangible way that gets our imagination alive that Jesus is born into our midst. That vision that allows us to rejoice in all circumstances was given to us by a great saint who has our popes acknowledgement and celebration, because Jorge Bergoglio took the name of Francesco Bernardone, of Francis of Assisi. And it was Francis who gave us this way of joyful celebration and shows us how to rejoice always, giving thanks in all circumstances. Francis started off his great adventure singing as a young man of the freedom that he had discovered. He who was so fired in his imagination. He wanted to be a great soldier, but something else captured him. It wasn't the call of the battlefield. It was the cry of a leper who called to him and who led him to go and touch and clothe that leper. It was the cry of Jesus who said, "Come, rebuild my church," that led him to let go of all the riches of his family and his friends and his possessions and give himself over to become the crazy kid dancing and singing in the streets of Assisi. And how attractive that was, for he heard a call that the Christian world had to become, in its heart, really and literally like Christ. And he took the gospel, not as a suggestion, but as the actual way. He lived according to Jesus's call and attracted to him Bernard of Quantavalli, and soon a group of men joined him in this great adventure of living the gospel in its primitive purity. So successful was this that soon hundreds and indeed thousands of men and women attracted to that way of life came to follow him. It was a different point in his life, however, that Francis came to that first Christmas celebration. His body was no longer young. It was broken by his really strict fasts. It was worn out by his travelings, even to go and preach the gospel amongst the Muslims. It was worn out by the care and the disappointment that his great vision had become compromised, had become routinized, that his desire to have a community that lived primitively the gospel didn't seem to work for the thousands that came. Yes, it was a pope who was a friend, Honorius. It was his cardinal protector, Ugolino, who had been a friend. It was one of his spiritual sons, Elias, who eventually would lead the Franciscan community as its minister general into a way that would have broken Francis's heart. It was they who got a hold of his rule and said, well, you can't really expect people to travel without, as Jesus said, without extra shoes or a staff. Be reasonable. They took that out of his order, out of his rule. You can't really expect people to go to the lepers as being of the essence of following you. And they took that out of the rules. You can't really expect people not to have churches, your followers to have homes, and you took that out of the rule. So defeated, he came back from Rome. Defeated because his great adventure of joy had been routinized and controlled by the powers of compromise and the powers of, well, let's conform with what the world has to do. And it sound a little bit like us, huh? Institutions aren't very flexible at dealing with the reality of people. They have big rules about how many people can gather at church, how many people can get at home. They have a way of worldly thinking. And Francis came away at the end of this life's journey, seeing his vision broken. And what did he do? He went to Greccio to visit a friend of his, Thomas of Eltre. And there, he decided to do something as Christmas approached. So he said to John Velita, who was the lord of the area, if you would like to celebrate the feast of Christmas at Greccio, he wrote to him, go there now and do what I tell you. I would like a figure made of the babe of Bethlehem so that we can actually see with our own eyes where the babe lay and in what discomfort the newborn infant. We must see the manger and the babe lying on the hay between an ox and an ass. Here is the example of how Francis was such a practical, joy-filled man. There had been a couple of crashes, presepi, in the Church of Santa Maria in Trastevere in Rome. Perhaps he saw it there, this tiny little thing, but it was still removed from people. And he said, no, the story of God that gives us joy is that God is with us. And I want people to know, whether they are highborn or lowborn, that Jesus is there in their midst, in a stinky stable. And so he got an ox and an ass. He found a Mary and Joseph. He had a beautiful statue of the baby Jesus that could be held by Mary. And the people came from all around. In 4 years, it'll be 800 years since Francis in 1224 brought all the people. What a sight it must have been to see them with all their candles coming from their poor hovels in the middle of a cold winter, with the torches burning, gathering around that place. And Francis, for the first and as far as we know, the only time, actually dressed as the deacon that he was, and led the people in the gospel at Holy Mass. Francis, whose voice was already beginning to go, whose eyes were just fading because of a terrible disease, he was able, they said, to sing sweetly the gospel of Jesus, to sing sweetly the gospel of Jesus. And Thomas of Celano tells us that the people around saw that when Francis took that mannequin of the baby Jesus and put it in the manger, the baby opened his eyes and looked on his beautiful, loving saint. Rejoice. That was the way that Francis was to live this time. The next months of his life were even worse physically. He could hardly walk, but he would still insist on walking. So to the point that his poor feet, because he walked barefoot all the time, could hardly bear him, and they'd put him on a donkey. His friends worried about his eyes, which were so inflamed that bit by bit he was losing all sight. And yet, he even more went to the place of being one, making straight for the Lord a way into his heart in prayer. And in prayer, in these last months, he received, for the first time that we know of in history, the very marks and suffering of Jesus on his body. He knew the stigmata, bleeding and hurting him and wounding him in answer to his prayers. Lord, I want to share in your suffering, so that he could share in his joy. And he insisted on joy. The next Christmas, the brothers asked him if it was appropriate and maybe a bit scandalous that he who fasted so much should insist on meat, on feasting. He said, no, Christmas is the time for feasting. Even the walls should eat meat, he said. And he ordered them to smear fat on the walls so that the walls could have meat in their way. This is what happens when we allow Jesus to imprint himself upon our souls. It's not the grim way of a boring routine of Christmas after the other. It's the sweet way of joy that Jesus fills our hearts. And Francis lived that in prayer in the midst of even greater suffering because his friends worried about his eyes and the doctors were hacks. Like all science, it's guesswork. And the guesswork that they did was to put hot pokers and cauterize his eyes. And it was agony beyond agony, and it didn't work, so they did it again. They did horrible things to him to make him better. And in all of this, he sang even more. He composed the Canticle of Canticles as he rested in the home of his dear friend, St. Clare, praising God for all the gifts of the earth that he couldn't see anymore, but that he knew. And he praised God for the gift of peace as from his sickness he stopped another war breaking out between Perugia and Assisi. And even at the end, he composed one more song. That is the last verse of his Canticle of the Creatures, singing in joy at the coming of Sister Death. He sang, and they slept him back and forth because the people of Assisi were terrified that Francis would die and those dang Perugians would come and take his body and they would get his relic. So even in his death, Francis is battered back and forth by the ways of the world. And what did he do? He rejoiced always. His brothers sang with him. He couldn't sing anymore. He couldn't see anymore. The only thing that he wanted, though, was to sing, and sing they did. And his dear friend, whom he called Brother Giacomo, who was a noblewoman from Rome, who knew his request for a gift, for a shroud to cover his body, and for a taste of the sweet almond bread that she would make. Miraculously, she came to his side. And there he could only get a little bite of that bread. But what joy. And he asked them to strip his body naked, for he had begun naked his journey in the Lord. And he asked them to lay it on the ground. And there he sang the Canticle of the Creatures with his brothers. His superior said, "Francis, it is not good for you to be naked. I order you to put on and accept the loan of this cloak." And they put on his habit. And he sang. He sang, and Brother Elias came in and said to him, "You shouldn't sing, it's causing a scandal. You're supposed to be solemn at your death." But he sang anyway. He rejoiced always in the Lord. And singing, he went into the hands of the God who had given him his son Jesus as a baby, as the word of life, as a community, and as the Holy Eucharist. This is why we rejoice. Francis shows us how to make straight the way that the Lord may come into our hearts this Christmas.